So that was a very interesting concept to me, that your identity is negotiated from a very early age. When I first heard that, it didn't settle in me. It didn't really sit right. There was something felt off about it. And so I decided I'd try to think it out and talk through it with you, and I'd be very curious to hear your thoughts on this. What do you think? Is your identity negotiated from a very early age, or do you create your own identity? Do you have your own identity apart from what others think or say about you? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to have a conversation with you about this. So there's a few things to keep in mind here. So identity in Jungian terms. First, the word identity is pretty loaded, right? We can use that to refer to our personal identity, our social identity, role identity, gender identity, cultural or ethnic identity. But when I say identity, what I'm referring to specifically, more than anything, is the personal identity, right? The descriptions that make you distinct from everyone else. Might include your personal beliefs, your values, personality traits, physical characteristics, etc. So Carl Jung, he proposed several concepts related to identity that most of us are aware of. The persona, the ego, the shadow, the anima and animus, the self as the whole, right? And that's kind of the most important concept in Jung's theory related to identity. The self, to Jung, represents the unified unconsciousness and consciousness of an individual, right? The unconscious and the conscious unified. The creation of the self, or the realization and integration of the self, is what he calls individuation, which is a lifelong psychological process. So basically, the way it works is you have these parts of yourself. Let's just imagine that you have this higher version of yourself, right? The most ideal, perfect version of you that you're always striving to become. Individuation is basically when you realize yourself and integrate yourself. Do we negotiate our identity? So let's try to understand this from a Jungian perspective. Our identity is made up of the shadow, the anima or animus, the persona, the ego. Do we negotiate these things? Our self, like the highest version of ourself, let's say, is that something that other people influence? And this is definitely one of those yes and no sorts of scenarios. At very least, this is partially true in a sense. We do negotiate 100% our identities from an early age, in the sense that, well, here's an example. When I was a kid, I don't know, maybe around 7, 8 years old, I went to a camp. And I was playing with my friends, and we were roughhousing as young boys do, and I was pretty good at judo throws. And I basically threw this kid, and he got hurt a little bit, but nothing too severe. But a counselor saw, right? A big, kind of chunky guy came running over. It was probably 18, 19, something like that. And he grabbed me by the shirt, pulled me off balance, and shoved me into the dirt. Thumped his finger on my chest and basically chewed me out. Even though, looking back on that, it seems like a very insignificant thing, that single action led me to believing that the authority figures in my life existed, at least in part, to knock me down, to push me into the dirt, and to humiliate me in front of my friends and in front of everyone. And it wrote a little story in my mind called something like, I am rejected, humiliated, and sneered at by those in power. This is who they are, and this is who I am. And the poverty and victim mentality that was fairly common in my social class, let's say, and the environment I lived in growing up, really only solidified that. This was actually something that I had to work out. I had to kind of dig down in my unconscious mind, realize that part of my shadow, and understand, oh, okay, this is something that I need to correct. I can't live with a poverty mentality like this. And thankfully, that's something I've done, or at very least done my best to do. And there you have it. So the negotiation process there between myself and that camp counselor was something like me, as I play in the yard with these kids, saying, "Look at me. I'm big, I'm strong, I know wrestling, I know judo, I can take you guys down, I'm the big dog." And then the counselor coming by and saying, "No, no, 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 you're not." Shoving me in the dirt, thumping his finger in my chest and saying, "Listen, you're small, you're insignificant, you're insufficient, you're incompetent, you are nothing." Now, did he really say that through his actions or his words? No, of course not. But my little brain took it that way, and my big brain kept it that way years later. Without even realizing it, I was negotiating for a part of my identity, and I got a bad deal. I got gypped. Whether he actually wanted anything like that or not. But the other side of the story is there's that self, that higher self, let's say. It's incredibly difficult to put your finger on. And it's so abstract, it's so conceptual, it's ethereal. And we'll dig a lot deeper into that later at the end of this video. I have an old excerpt that I think you'll really enjoy if you haven't seen it yet. But I think we all intuitively understand, we know that there is a version of ourself. You might call it the soul, you might call it the spirit, you might call it your higher self, you might just call it the self in Jungian terms. But whatever you call it, I do truly believe with every fiber of my being that there is a version of me that is better, higher than what I've realized and currently integrated. And I think that most of or all of that self or spirit or soul or whatever you want to call it is absolutely impenetrable, immovable, unshakable, immutable by anyone else. That part of my identity is untouchable unless I give someone permission to change it, unless I allow someone to influence me in a way that changes it. And so in that sense, I can't agree with the statement, we negotiate our identities from the age of 3 onward. I can't agree with it completely because I don't believe that it's completely true, but it certainly is, at very least, bare minimum, partially true. There are 2 identities, right? You have your current identity, the identity that you have now, which is just a small fraction of your true identity, your actual self, your higher self, what you have the potential to become. I believe that your current identity has been negotiated, 100%, at least part of it, and probably a lot of it with other people. That's just how it is. We're incredibly social creatures. It's not going to be any other way. But your true identity, that's something that no one can change. Unless maybe they shoot you in the head. Then what identity do you have? And then, of course, we get into the metaphysical side of things, like what happens after you die. And if what the majority of the world believes is true, they still haven't taken away your true identity. But I'll leave it at that for now. I hope you have a great day. Thank you so much for watching. As always, please do like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out a lot. I'll talk to you later, and I'll see you in the next one.